Chapter 1. The Bracelet's Whisper. The letter arrived on a frosty December morning, its envelope frayed at the edges as if it had been waiting for years to fulfill its purpose. Amelia held it between her gloved fingers, the faint aroma of lavender and old paper wafting upward. She turned it over, the handwriting unmistakable. Her grandmother's flowing cursive, bold yet tender. The address was her lakeside cottage, nestled on the outskirts of the town she had once called home but had left behind for the busyness of city life. The postmark bore no date, leaving its journey a mystery. Inside, the letter revealed a simple request. Her grandmother, Eleanor, had left her an heirloom. It was to be found in the attic of the old house by the lake, the house where Amelia had spent her childhood summers, surrounded by laughter, the scent of pine, and the soft hum of waves lapping against the shore. The letter's tone was cryptic, almost urgent, as if Eleanor had known this moment would come and had waited patiently for Amelia to return. By mid-afternoon, Amelia stood at the threshold of the house, the familiar creak of the wooden porch beneath her boots echoing in the quiet. Snow fell gently, layering the world in a pristine hush. She hesitated before turning the key, half expecting to hear her grandmother's warm voice welcoming her inside. Instead, the house greeted her with silence and the faint scent of cedar and nostalgia. The attic was as she remembered it, a labyrinth of trunks, forgotten treasures, and dust motes dancing in beams of winter light. The cold bit at her fingers as she rummaged through the clutter, guided by a sense of purpose she couldn't quite explain. Beneath a stack of faded quilts, she found it, a small wooden box, intricately carved with swirling patterns that seemed to ripple like water. Amelia lifted the lid with reverence. Inside, nestled in velvet, lay a delicate charm bracelet. The charms, shaped like stars, snowflakes, and tiny hearts, glimmered as though lit from within. A folded note lay beside it, the paper thin and brittle. She unfolded it carefully, her breath catching as she read the words. "This bracelet carries the power to grant Christmas wishes, but only for others. Use it wisely and remember, the truest magic lies in the heart that gives." The message was signed simply, Eleanor. Amelia's first reaction was disbelief. It had to be a sentimental gesture, a story woven by her grandmother to add an air of mystery to the bracelet. Yet as she held it, the charms seemed to hum softly, their glow pulsating faintly, as if in rhythm with her heartbeat. A flicker of curiosity ignited within her, mingled with a deep yearning for connection, to her grandmother, to the town she had once loved, and perhaps even to something greater. Over the next few days, Amelia reacquainted herself with the lakeside town. Snow-covered rooftops and twinkling lights transformed the streets into a postcard-perfect scene. She walked through the marketplace, where the scent of roasted chestnuts and pine mingled with laughter and carols. The townsfolk recognized her, their smiles warm but tinged with curiosity at her sudden return. She was drawn to a small shop tucked at the end of the main street, its window display a whimsical array of hand-carved toys. The sign above the door read Gabriel's workshop. She paused, captivated by the intricate detail of a wooden carousel displayed in the window. It spun slowly, the tiny horses seeming to gallop in the glow of a lantern placed beside it. Inside, the shop was a wonderland of craftsmanship, each toy a testament to the maker's skill and passion. The air smelled of wood shavings and varnish, a comforting blend that spoke of dedication and artistry. Amelia's eyes fell on a figure behind the counter, a man with dark hair streaked with silver at the temples, his expression absorbed as he worked on a delicate marionette. His hands moved with precision, yet there was a guardedness about him, as if he had built walls even higher than the shelves that lined the shop. "That's Gabriel," whispered a voice behind her. She turned to see an older woman, her face kind and weathered. "He's lived here for years, but but he's not much for conversation. Keeps to himself, mostly. A brilliant toy maker, though. The woman smiled, then left Amelia to her thoughts. Something about Gabriel intrigued her, though she couldn't say why. Perhaps it was the quiet sadness that lingered in his posture, or the way his hands brought life to inanimate objects while his own seemed to lack it. As she stepped out of the shop and into the crisp evening air, the bracelet on her wrist warmed slightly, a subtle reminder of its presence. That night, Amelia sat by the fire in her grandmother's parlor, the bracelet catching the flickering light. She thought about the townsfolk she had seen that day. The woman in the market struggling to sell her handmade wreaths, the little boy who had dropped his sled and cried when it broke, and Gabriel, the enigmatic toymaker whose eyes spoke volumes of unspoken stories. A question took root in her mind. What if the bracelet's magic was real? And if it was, who would she help first? The bracelet seemed to hum in agreement, as though it already knew the answer. With a deep breath, Amelia resolved to find out. Somewhere beneath the layers of skepticism and practicality, a spark of wonder flickered to life, and for the first time in years, she felt the quiet thrill of possibility. Christmas, it seemed, had more in store for her than she had ever imagined. Chapter 2. Echoes in the Snow. The morning arrived with a pale sun hanging low in the sky, its light diffused by the dense curtain of snowflakes swirling over the town. Amelia stepped out of the cottage, the bracelet secure on her wrist, its charms catching glints of winter light. The bracelet felt like both a comfort and a weight, its power, if it was indeed real, adding a new layer of responsibility to her return. She made her way into town, the snow crunching beneath her boots. The familiar streets, draped in wreaths and garlands, shimmered with an old-world charm. It was a town seemingly untouched by time. But Amelia knew that the people who lived here carried burdens of their own. Perhaps it was her newfound connection to the bracelet, or simply the holiday season. But she found herself looking at her neighbors more closely, searching their faces for stories. Her first stop was the marketplace. Beneath a wooden stall painted with peeling red and green stripes, she found Lydia Fletcher, an elderly woman with hands as gnarled as the pine wreaths she was trying to sell. Lydia's voice was raspy as she called out to passing shoppers, but few stopped. Her wreaths, though beautifully crafted, seemed lost among the more vibrant displays of ornaments and toys. Amelia lingered by the stall, her heart tugged by the weariness in Lydia's eyes. "Good morning, Amelia," Lydia said, her voice cracking from the cold. "It's been years since I saw you last. I'm glad to see you back." Amelia smiled warmly. "Good morning, Mrs. Fletcher. These wreaths are lovely. I'll take one." Lydia's face softened, but her gratitude was subdued, as though she'd long ago learned not to expect much kindness. Amelia handed over the money and carefully placed the wreath in her basket. As she walked away, the bracelet warmed again, its charms faintly aglow. She paused, her breath visible in the frigid air, and glanced back at Lydia. The older woman had turned to arrange her wreaths, her movements slow and deliberate. A memory surfaced, her grandmother speaking of Lydia's struggles after her husband had passed, leaving her with debts and little else. The warmth of the bracelet seemed to nudge Amelia, as if urging her to act. Without fully understanding why, she closed her eyes and held the bracelet, focusing her thoughts on Lydia. A wish formed in her mind. For Lydia to find abundance this Christmas, for her efforts to be rewarded. When Amelia opened her eyes, the bracelet's glow had faded, and everything seemed unchanged. She exhaled a small laugh, chastising herself for expecting something dramatic. Yet as she moved through the marketplace, she overheard snippets of conversations from other shoppers, now speaking about Lydia's wreaths with sudden interest. By the time Amelia circled back, a small crowd had gathered around the stall, admiring the craftsmanship and buying the wreaths faster than Lydia could wrap them. Amelia lingered at a distance, her chest swelling with quiet wonder. Could it really be the bracelet? Or was this just a happy coincidence? Whatever the answer, she couldn't deny the joy it brought to see Lydia smiling, her hands now busy with eager customers. Her next stop was the town's frozen lake, where children skated in a cacophony of laughter and shrieks. A boy stood at the edge, clutching a broken sled. His cheeks were flushed with cold, but his eyes brimmed with tears. Amelia recognized him as Charlie Harper, the youngest of a family that had seen better days. She knelt beside him, her voice gentle. "What happened, Charlie?" He sniffled, holding up the sled. "It broke when I hit a rock. Now I can't ride anymore." The sled was battered, its wooden runners splintered beyond repair. Amelia glanced at the bracelet, the idea forming before she could second-guess it. She placed a hand on the sled, focusing once more. A wish took shape, for Charlie to have a sled that could bring him joy again. The bracelet's glow returned briefly, and when Charlie lifted his sled, his eyes widened. The splintered runners were whole again, the wood gleaming as though freshly polished. He gasped in delight, his earlier sorrow forgotten, as he clutched the sled and ran toward the ice. Amelia watched him go, her heart a mixture of disbelief and exhilaration. She had granted 2 wishes in a single day, and the bracelet had responded each time. It was real, it was magic, and it was hers to use. But she couldn't ignore the weight of that responsibility. The sun dipped lower in the sky as she made her way back to the cottage. Snow began to fall again, the world settling into a serene hush. Yet even as the peace of the evening surrounded her, her thoughts lingered on Gabriel. There had been something about him that pulled at her, though she couldn't quite define it. The way he had focused so intently on his work, his expression a mask of concentration that seemed to shield deeper emotions. As she crossed the threshold of the cottage, the bracelet gave one last, gentle pulse of warmth, as if it, too, was reminding her of the story yet to unfold. Amelia sat by the fire once more, the flickering flames casting shadows that danced across the room. She turned the bracelet over in her hands, tracing the intricate charms and wondering what other wishes it might bring, and what price might come with them. Christmas had always been a time of giving, of miracles and surprises, but now, for the first time, it felt as though the season itself had chosen her for something greater. The echoes in the snow, the whispers of the bracelet, and the lives she had already touched all pointed to a journey far more profound than she had anticipated. And she wasn't sure whether to feel exhilarated or afraid. Chapter 3: Threads of Light. The following morning dawned crisp and clear, the snow sparkling under a sky painted in soft hues of lavender and gold. Amelia stood at the window of her grandmother's parlor, a steaming mug of tea warming her hands. The bracelet rested on her wrist, the charms glinting faintly in the light. It was no longer merely an heirloom. It was alive with purpose, a quiet, mysterious force urging her forward. The wishes she had granted lingered in her mind, their outcomes more than she could have hoped for. And yet, questions crowded her thoughts. What were the limits of this magic? And what, if anything, might it demand in return? She was still mulling these questions when a knock at the door startled her. Setting her mug aside, she opened it to find her childhood friend, Clara Whitmore, standing on the porch, bundled in a thick scarf and mittens. Clara's freckled face lit up with delight at the sight of Amelia. "I heard you were back," Clara exclaimed, pulling Amelia into a warm hug. "I couldn't believe it. It's been years." Amelia smiled, the familiarity of Clara's enthusiasm soothing. "It has. I've missed this place more than I realized." Clara stepped back, her expression softening. "I'm glad you're here. It's not the same without you. Are you coming to the winter festival tonight?" Everyone will be there. The winter festival. Amelia had almost forgotten about the annual celebration. Memories of twinkling lights, carols, and the warmth of community came flooding back. I hadn't planned on it, but maybe I should, she said. Clara beamed. You have to. Besides, it's a perfect excuse to catch up. I'll see you there. As Clara left, Amelia closed the door, feeling a pull toward the festival. The bracelet, cool against her wrist, seemed to agree. She spent the afternoon preparing, rummaging through the old wardrobe in her grandmother's room until she found a deep green coat that fit her perfectly. When the sun dipped below the horizon, she set off for the town square, her boots crunching through the fresh snow. The festival was everything she remembered. Strings of lights crisscrossed above the square, illuminating the stalls laden with baked goods, ornaments, and handcrafted gifts. The scent of mulled cider and spiced cookies wafted through the air. Children raced around in a blur of laughter, their cheeks rosy with cold. Amelia walked slowly, taking it all in, her heart swelling with a bittersweet mixture of nostalgia and newfound wonder. Her attention was drawn to a small crowd gathered near a booth draped in red and gold fabric. At the center was a young woman with a basket of scarves. She was demonstrating her weaving technique, the loom beside her clacking rhythmically. Amelia recognized her as Rose Merritt, the weaver who had moved to town a few years ago. Rose's scarves were beautiful, intricate patterns of winter landscapes and swirling stars, but it was clear that few people were buying. Amelia approached the booth, her gaze falling on a scarf depicting a scene of snow-covered pine trees under a starlit sky. "This is incredible," she said, running her fingers over the soft fabric. Rose looked up, her face lighting with surprise. "Thank you. It's one of my favorites." Amelia purchased the scarf, slipping it into her bag as Rose's expression softened with gratitude. But even as Amelia walked away, the bracelet hummed faintly, the now familiar warmth spreading through her wrist. She turned back, watching Rose adjust her scarves with a quiet determination, her shoulders tense as though she carried the weight of uncertainty. Amelia stepped into a quiet corner of the square, closed her eyes, and placed a hand over the bracelet. She pictured Rose and her loom, the vivid patterns she created, and the quiet pride in her work. Her wish was clear, for Rose's talents to be recognized and rewarded. The bracelet glowed softly, then dimmed, its magic settling into the still night air. Amelia opened her eyes to see a small group of onlookers gathering around Rose's booth, admiring her scarves with newfound interest. By the time Amelia circled back, several scarves had sold, and Rose's face was alight with joy. Feeling buoyed by the success of her wish, Amelia wandered toward the center of the square, where a towering Christmas tree glittered with ornaments and lights. It was here that she spotted Gabriel, standing apart from the festivities. He was near the toy stall, his expression pensive as he adjusted the display of wooden figurines and wind-up toys. The intricate carousel she had admired in his shop was now spinning at the center of the stall, its tiny horses gleaming under the lights. Amelia hesitated before approaching. Something about Gabriel's solitude intrigued her, as though he existed on the edges of the joy around him. She drew closer, pretending to admire the carousel. "It's beautiful," she said softly. Gabriel glanced at her, his expression guarded. "Thank you." It took weeks to carve. She could sense his reluctance to engage, but his voice held a quiet pride that hinted at the passion he poured into his work. Amelia smiled, stepping back to let others admire the toys. As she moved away, she glanced over her shoulder and caught Gabriel watching her, his eyes shadowed by something she couldn't name. The bracelet warmed again, a subtle reminder of its presence. Amelia's heart quickened. Gabriel's guardedness felt like a puzzle, one she wasn't yet ready to solve. But the threads of light weaving through the festival, through Lydia, Charlie, Rose, and now Gabriel, seemed to connect in ways she didn't fully understand. As the evening wound down and the crowd began to disperse, Amelia returned to the cottage. She sat by the fire, the scarf she had bought from Rose draped over her lap. The bracelet rested against her skin, cool now, but still glimmering faintly in the firelight. She traced its charms with her fingers, the possibilities it held both thrilling and daunting. The threads of light that had guided her so far seemed to hum with purpose, weaving a tapestry of connection and hope. And somewhere within that tapestry was a story waiting to be unraveled, one she was only beginning to understand. Chapter 4. A Wish for Another. The frost clung to the windows of Amelia's cottage in delicate patterns, like lace woven by unseen hands. The morning sun pierced through the icy panes, filling the room with a cool, silver light. Amelia sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee, her thoughts drifting back to the winter festival. The scarf from Rose lay folded neatly on the counter, a testament to the warmth and connection that had begun to shape her return to the town. Yet, her mind lingered on Gabriel, his quiet presence and the shadows that seemed to follow him. The bracelet rested on her wrist, its weight both comforting and insistent. It was a reminder that her journey was far from over. The wishes she had granted so far had brought joy and light to others, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the bracelet held deeper secrets, ones she had yet to uncover. The soft sound of knocking broke her reverie. Rising, Amelia opened the door to find Clara standing on the porch, her cheeks flushed from the cold. "Morning, Amelia," Clara said, her breath clouding the air. "I was on my way to the bakery and thought I'd stop by. Have you heard about the old Whitaker house?" Amelia shook her head, curious. The Whitaker house, perched at the edge of town near the woods, had always been shrouded in mystery. It had stood empty for years, its windows dark and its walls weathered by time. "Someone's moving in," Clara continued, her eyes bright with excitement. "A family, I think. They were unloading boxes yesterday. It's strange, though. I thought for sure that place was beyond repair." Amelia's curiosity piqued. The Whitaker house had been a source of fascination for her as a child, its overgrown garden and creaking shutters sparking countless stories in her imagination. Now, it seemed, its story was about to change. "Maybe I'll take a walk that way later," Amelia said, smiling at Clara. "Thanks for letting me know." Clara nodded, pulling her scarf tighter around her neck. "Don't be a stranger, Amelia. Let's catch up properly soon." As Clara disappeared down the snowy lane, Amelia found herself drawn to the idea of visiting the old house. She bundled up and stepped into the crisp air, the bracelet glinting faintly beneath her sleeve. Her boots left fresh tracks in the snow as she made her way through the quiet streets, the town still waking from its slumber. When she reached the edge of the woods, the Whitaker house came into view. It was just as she remembered. Its gabled roof sagged slightly, and ivy crawled up the faded brick walls. But there were signs of life now. A truck was parked in the driveway, its bed piled high with furniture. Smoke curled from the chimney, dissipating into the icy sky. Amelia hesitated, unsure if she should approach. As she stood there, a boy emerged from the house, a scarf wrapped haphazardly around his neck. He carried a bundle of firewood in his arms, his steps careful on the icy path. Something about his determined expression struck Amelia, and before she knew it, she was walking toward him. "Hi there," she called gently, not wanting to startle him. "Do you need a hand with that?" The boy looked up, his face wary but polite. "No, thank you," he said. "I can manage." Amelia nodded, her smile warm. "I'm Amelia. I used to live here in town. It's nice to see someone fixing up this old place." The boy's expression softened slightly. "I'm Oliver," he said. "My mom and I just moved in. She says it's going to be our fresh start." "A fresh start," Amelia recognized the hope in those words, as fragile as the frost coating the branches around them. She watched as Oliver carefully carried the firewood inside, the door closing softly behind him. There was something unspoken in his demeanor, a quiet strength that belied his years. The bracelet warmed against her wrist, its magic stirring. Amelia's thoughts turned to Oliver and his mother, imagining the challenges they must have faced to bring them here. She closed her eyes, focusing her wish for the Whitaker house to truly become a place of warmth and renewal for them, a haven where they could find peace and belonging. When she opened her eyes, the house seemed to glow faintly in the winter sunlight, as if acknowledging her wish. She lingered for a moment longer, then turned back toward town, her steps lighter than before. The rest of the day passed quietly. Amelia spent the afternoon organizing her grandmother's belongings, uncovering small treasures that spoke of a life filled with love and care. Among the keepsakes, she found an old journal with pressed flowers tucked between its pages. The handwriting was delicate, the ink faded but legible. As she read, Amelia realized it was her grandmother's account of the bracelet's origins. The journal spoke of a snowy evening long ago, when the bracelet had first come into the family's possession. A stranger had appeared at the door, seeking shelter from a storm. In gratitude for her grandmother's kindness, he had left the bracelet behind, describing it as a gift meant to spread light and joy. The pages were filled with stories of wishes granted, of lives touched by the magic of the charms. But there was also a warning. The bracelet's power was not limitless, and each wish came with a cost, one that was not always immediately apparent. Amelia closed the journal, her thoughts heavy. The bracelet's magic had already changed her life and the lives of those around her. But what price had she unknowingly paid? And what lay ahead? As the evening settled over the town, Amelia sat by the fire, the journal on her lap and the bracelet gleaming softly in the flickering light. Outside, the frost thickened on the windows, its intricate patterns like secrets waiting to be unraveled. The Whitaker house, Gabriel, the wishes, all of it felt like pieces of a puzzle, their connections just out of reach. And yet, in the stillness of the night, Amelia felt a quiet determination grow within her. The bracelet had chosen her for a reason, and whatever secrets it held, she would face them, even if the answers lay hidden in the frost. Chapter 5. The Toymaker's Shadow. The snow had thickened overnight, laying a pristine blanket over the town. Morning sunlight refracted off the frost-covered branches, casting a dazzling display of crystalline light across Amelia's window panes. The air held a sharp chill, but Amelia felt an unusual warmth as she pulled on her boots, preparing for the day's quiet explorations. She had spent much of the previous evening lost in her grandmother's journal, the weight of the bracelet on her wrist now heavier with understanding. It wasn't simply a conduit for granting wishes. It was a legacy, imbued with a purpose that was both beautiful and fraught with mystery. Its power, while kind in intention, seemed tethered to the fabric of the wearer's soul. Each wish carried ripples, reaching further than she could imagine. Amelia's thoughts circled back to Oliver and his mother. She hoped her wish for them had taken root in the creaking beams and cold hearth of the Whitaker house. Though she hadn't seen Gabriel again since the winter festival, the shadow of his quiet, guarded demeanor lingered in her mind. There was a connection there, she was certain of it, and she was determined to uncover it. Her first destination that morning was the town's library, a charming old building that seemed to sag comfortably under the weight of its history. Inside, the scent of aged paper and polished wood enveloped her. Behind the counter, Miss Evelyn, the elderly librarian, looked up and smiled warmly. "Amelia, dear, it's been too long," Evelyn said, her voice carrying the familiarity of someone who had known Amelia as a child. "What brings you in today?" "Good morning, Miss Evelyn," Amelia replied, brushing snow from her coat. I'm hoping to learn more about the Whitaker house. Do you have any records about its history? Evelyn's eyes brightened with curiosity. Oh, the Whitaker house is quite the story. Let me show you where we keep the old town archives. Amelia followed Evelyn through the rows of shelves to a small, tucked-away room where dusty binders and faded maps lined the walls. Evelyn gestured toward a table stacked with yellowed documents. "Help yourself," Evelyn said. "If you need anything, I'll be at the desk." Amelia thanked her and began sorting through the files, her fingers brushing over brittle papers and faded photographs. The Whitaker house's history unraveled before her. It had been built in the early 1900s by a reclusive craftsman named Theodore Whitaker, a man whose life was steeped in tragedy. His wife had died young, leaving him to raise their son alone. Rumors of heartbreak and a long-lost heirloom surrounded the family's story, and the house had eventually fallen into disrepair after their deaths. One photograph caught Amelia's attention. It depicted Theodore and his young son standing in front of the house, their faces solemn. In Theodore's hand, a small object glinted in the sunlight, a charm bracelet. Her breath caught as she studied the image, the resemblance to her own bracelet undeniable. The pages of the journal whispered in her memory. Could it be that Theodore had been the stranger her grandmother had written about? And if so, what had brought him to her family's door on that snowy night? Her thoughts were interrupted by a quiet cough. She turned to find Gabriel standing in the doorway, his expression a mix of surprise and something she couldn't quite place. "Amelia," he said, his voice low. "Didn't expect to see you here." "I could say the same," she replied, her pulse quickening. "Are you researching something too?" He nodded, stepping into the room. "I've been looking into my family's history. Turns out, I'm distantly related to the Whitakers." Amelia stared at him, her mind racing. "The Whitakers?" she echoed. "That house is connected to you?" Gabriel's lips curved into a faint smile. "In a way, yes. My grandmother used to tell stories about Theodore Whitaker and his obsession with preserving something he called the light of Christmas. I always thought it was just a family legend, but the more I've learned, the more it seems like there might be some truth to it." Amelia's gaze fell to the photograph in her hands. She turned it toward Gabriel, watching his expression shift as he took it in. "The bracelet," he murmured, his voice tinged with awe. "It's the same as yours, isn't it?" She nodded slowly, the weight of their shared discovery pressing down on her. "I think it might be." "Gabriel, what if the bracelet's magic started with Theodore? What if it's connected to your family's history?" Gabriel's brow furrowed, his gaze distant. "If that's true, then it's not just about granting wishes. There's more to this than we understand." The library's clock chimed softly, breaking the moment. Gabriel glanced at the window, where snow continued to fall in gentle flurries. "I should go," he said, his voice hesitant. "But maybe we should talk more about this. There's a lot we don't know." Amelia nodded, her thoughts still spinning. "Let's figure it out together." As Gabriel left, Amelia lingered in the archive room, her gaze returning to the photograph. The echoes of the past were growing louder, and the pieces of the puzzle were beginning to align. But with each revelation, new questions arose, and the bracelet's magic felt less like a gift and more like a responsibility. Clutching the photograph, Amelia stepped out into the snowy streets, the crisp air biting at her cheeks. The charm bracelet warmed against her wrist, its silent presence a reminder that the answers she sought were as much about the future as they were about the past. Chapter 6. Secrets Beneath the Fur. The snowstorm persisted through the night, muffling the town in a shroud of silence. Amelia sat by her living room window, the soft glow of a single candle illuminating the journal spread open before her. The photograph she'd found at the library lay next to it, Theodore Whitaker's solemn gaze staring back at her through time. Outside, the wind howled, bending the branches of the evergreens. But inside, the world felt still, as though waiting for her to make the next move. Her thoughts swirled with the revelations of the day. Gabriel's connection to the Whitakers had been an unexpected turn, and it deepened the mystery surrounding the bracelet. She turned the pages of the journal, her grandmother's neat handwriting recounting moments that now felt imbued with a strange magic. One passage in particular caught her attention. December 14th, 1953. The man came again today. He didn't stay long, but he spoke of the house by the lake. He said its light was fading, and something precious had been lost. He seemed burdened, as though the weight of years had left him hollow. I don't know why, but I feel as though he's entrusted me with something sacred. Amelia traced the words with her fingertips, imagining her grandmother's world and the enigmatic man who had visited her. Was it Theodore Whitaker? And if so, what had he meant by the light fading? She felt certain the answer lay within the house by the lake, a place she had only glimpsed from a distance. The next morning, the storm had subsided, leaving the town blanketed in pristine white. Amelia dressed warmly, tucking the photograph into her coat pocket and slipping on the bracelet. She decided it was time to visit the Whitaker house, her curiosity outweighing any hesitation. The snow crunched under her boots as she made her way to the outskirts of town, where the lake lay still and shimmering under the pale winter sun. The house stood at the edge of the water, its silhouette stark against the icy expanse. Its once grand facade was weathered, the shutters hanging askew and the paint peeling in long strips. Yet, there was an undeniable beauty to it, a lingering echo of its past splendor. Amelia approached the front door, its heavy oak surface adorned with a faded wreath. She hesitated, her gloved hand hovering over the tarnished brass knocker. "You're braver than I thought." She spun around to see Gabriel standing a few paces behind her, his hands shoved deep into his coat pockets. His breath formed clouds in the crisp air, and his expression was a mix of amusement and concern. "I didn't mean to startle you," he said, "but this isn't exactly a place people visit lightly." "I couldn't stay away," Amelia admitted, stepping back from the door. "There's something here I need to understand. About the bracelet, about Theodore Whitaker, maybe even about you." Gabriel's gaze flickered to her wrist, where the charm bracelet gleamed faintly. He sighed, his breath heavy with unspoken words. "If you're going in," he said finally, "you shouldn't go alone. This house, it has a way of holding on to people." Together, they pushed open the door, which groaned on its hinges. Inside, the air was cold and thick with the scent of decay and aged wood. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light that filtered through the cracked windows. The grand staircase dominated the foyer, its banister carved with intricate designs that had survived the years. A sense of melancholy hung in the air, as though the house itself mourned its lost inhabitants. Amelia's boots left faint impressions in the dust as she wandered into the parlor. Faded wallpaper clung stubbornly to the walls, and the remnants of a fireplace sat cold and empty. On the mantel, an ornate clock stood frozen at 3:15. Gabriel lingered near the doorway, his posture tense. "This place was beautiful once," Amelia said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You can feel it, even now." "Beautiful," Gabriel echoed, his tone distant, but haunted by what it couldn't keep. Amelia turned to him, her curiosity growing. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, then stepped further into the room. Theodore Whitaker poured everything he had into this house. He built it for his family, but when they were gone, it became his prison. My grandmother said he spent his final years searching for something he could never find. Amelia's gaze fell to the bracelet on her wrist. "And you think it has something to do with this?" Gabriel's eyes darkened. "I don't know, but there are stories about a treasure hidden here, something Theodore wanted to protect. People say he believed it could bring back the light he lost. The words sent a shiver down Amelia's spine. She moved toward a cabinet that stood in the corner, its doors slightly ajar. Inside, she found a collection of books, their spines cracked and worn. One of them caught her eye, a leather-bound volume with an ornate clasp. She opened it carefully, revealing pages filled with sketches and notes in a meticulous hand. "Look at this," she said, holding the book out to Gabriel. He joined her, his brow furrowing as he examined the pages. "These are his designs," he said, "for toys, for furniture. But some of these," he trailed off, pointing to a series of sketches that depicted the bracelet. Amelia's heart raced as she studied the drawings. They were detailed, showing the charms in various configurations. Beside them were notes, scribbled in a hand that seemed desperate and hurried. One phrase stood out: "The light must be shared, or it will fade forever." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Gabriel closed the book gently and looked at Amelia. "Whatever this light is," he said, "I think it's tied to the bracelet." "And to you." Amelia nodded, her resolve hardening. "Then we need to find out what it means. For Theodore, for this house, and for us." Gabriel's expression softened, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something unguarded in his eyes. "We will," he said. "Together." Chapter 7. The Lakeside Spark. Amelia awoke to a stillness that felt unnatural, as though the world outside had paused to hold its breath. Her dreams had been restless, fragments of sketches, faint voices calling her name, and a vision of the Whitaker house bathed in golden light. She sat up slowly, rubbing her temples as the remnants of sleep began to dissolve. The bracelet's charms glinted faintly in the dim morning light, their intricate details casting tiny shadows on her skin. Her thoughts turned to the journal, the photograph, and the strange phrases in Theodore Whitaker's notes. "The light must be shared, or it will fade forever." The words felt both cryptic and urgent, as though they were a warning from beyond the grave. Gabriel's quiet resolve lingered in her mind, his promise to help unravel the mystery giving her a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. The snow outside had settled into a dense, glittering blanket. Amelia dressed warmly, preparing for another trek to the Whitaker house. She couldn't shake the feeling that the answers they sought lay hidden within its walls. As she fastened her coat, she paused to study the bracelet. It felt heavier today, as though it carried the weight of untold stories. Slipping it onto her wrist, she made her way outside. Gabriel was waiting for her at the edge of the town square, his silhouette framed against the frozen lake. He greeted her with a nod, his expression serious. "You're sure about this?" he asked. Amelia nodded. "I feel like we're close to something. We can't stop now." Together, they walked the now familiar path to the Whitaker house. The snow crunched beneath their boots, the sound echoing in the crisp, silent air. When they reached the house, it seemed even more foreboding than before. The wind had swept snowdrifts against the front steps, and icicles hung like jagged teeth from the eaves. Gabriel pushed the door open, and they stepped inside. The interior was just as cold as the world outside. Their breaths formed visible puffs as they moved through the dimly lit rooms. Amelia's eyes were drawn to the staircase, its worn steps leading upward like a path into the unknown. "Let's check upstairs," she suggested, her voice barely above a whisper. Gabriel nodded, following her as she ascended. The second floor was eerily quiet, the long hallway lined with doors that seemed to watch them as they passed. One door at the end stood slightly ajar, and Amelia felt an inexplicable pull toward it. She pushed it open, revealing a small study filled with dust-covered furniture and stacks of old books. On the desk lay another journal, its cover cracked and faded with age. Amelia opened it carefully, her heart pounding as she scanned the pages. The handwriting was different from her grandmother's, but it felt just as familiar. It belonged to Theodore Whitaker. December 24th, 1953. The charms grow heavier with each passing day. The house whispers to me, begging for release, but I cannot let go. Not yet. The light is fading, and I fear it may be too late to save it. But if I fail, perhaps someone else will find the way. Amelia's breath caught in her throat. The entries continued, each one more frantic than the last. Theodore's desperation was palpable, his words a plea for redemption and understanding. She turned to the final page, where a sketch of the bracelet filled the space. Beneath it, a single line was scrawled. "The ice holds the truth." "What does that mean?" she murmured, her voice trembling. Gabriel leaned over her shoulder, his brow furrowing. "The ice?" he repeated. Could it be the lake? Amelia's mind raced. The lake had always been a centerpiece of the town, its frozen surface a symbol of winter's grip. She remembered childhood stories of treasures buried beneath its icy depths, tales whispered around campfires to entertain and frighten. "It has to be," she said, "the light Theodore was searching for. Maybe it's hidden there." Gabriel's expression darkened. "If that's true, it won't be easy to find. The ice is dangerous this time of year." "I know," Amelia replied, determination hardening her voice. "But we don't have a choice. This is what the bracelet's been leading us to." As they left the study, the house seemed to groan in protest, its wooden frame creaking as though it resented their intrusion. They returned to the parlor, where Gabriel built a small fire in the long cold hearth. The warmth was faint but welcome, and they sat in its glow, poring over the journal's contents. "There's something else," Gabriel said, pointing to a passage they'd overlooked. "The charms react to the bearer's intent. A selfless wish awakens their power. But beware, a selfish heart will find only emptiness." Amelia's fingers brushed the bracelet, the words sinking deep into her thoughts. Every wish she had made so far had been for others, yet the mystery of Theodore's light felt deeply personal. She wondered if she would have the strength to see this journey through to the end. As the fire burned low, Gabriel spoke again, his voice quiet but steady. "If we're going to the lake, we need to be prepared. Whatever's down there, it's waited this long. It won't give up its secrets easily." Amelia met his gaze, her resolve mirrored in his eyes. "Then we'll face it together." The wind outside began to howl once more, carrying with it the faint sound of ice shifting. It was as though the lake itself was stirring, its depths holding whispers of truths long buried. Amelia tightened her grip on the journal, the weight of her destiny pressing heavily on her shoulders. The threads of memory were weaving a story she could no longer ignore, and the next chapter awaited beneath the ice. Chapter 8. Reflections of Magic. The morning dawned with a brittle chill, the kind that wrapped itself around the bones and whispered caution into the hearts of those who dared venture into the icy world. Amelia stood at the edge of the lake, her breath rising in crystalline puffs as she gazed at the frost-coated expanse before her. The surface was deceptively serene, its glassy stillness masking the mysteries that lay beneath. The bracelet on her wrist seemed to pulse faintly, the charms catching the pale sunlight as if urging her onward. Gabriel arrived a few moments later, carrying a sturdy metal rod and a small canvas bag slung over his shoulder. His face was set in grim determination, though the faint lines around his eyes betrayed unease. "I brought what I could find," he said, holding up the rod. "It should be enough to break through the ice, but it'll take time." Amelia nodded, her fingers brushing the edge of the journal tucked safely in her coat. Theodore Whitaker's final words had been haunting her since she'd read them. "The ice holds the truth." She wasn't sure what they would find, but the bracelet's weight and the cryptic clues left behind insisted that they had to try. Together, they stepped onto the frozen lake. The ice groaned faintly beneath their boots, each step accompanied by the sharp crackle of frost fracturing underfoot. Gabriel moved cautiously, his gaze scanning the surface for weak spots. "This part should be thick enough," he said, stopping near the center. He set the bag down and pulled out a heavy mallet and a chisel. "We'll need to work carefully." Amelia crouched beside him, watching as he began to hammer the chisel into the ice. The sharp sound echoed across the lake, a rhythmic reminder of their task. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, though the landscape around them was empty save for the skeletal trees lining the shore. The bracelet's charms jingled softly with each movement, their faint music both comforting and unnerving. As Gabriel worked, Amelia's thoughts wandered to her grandmother. She imagined the older woman standing here, the bracelet clasped around her wrist, facing the same mysteries with courage and determination. What had her grandmother wished for? What sacrifices had she made? The questions churned in her mind, unanswered but insistent. "Got it," Gabriel said suddenly, breaking into her thoughts. He stepped back as a jagged hole appeared in the ice, revealing dark, still water beneath. Steam rose faintly from the opening, curling into the cold air like ghostly fingers. Amelia peered into the depths, her heart pounding. The water seemed impossibly black, as though it held the night itself. She shivered, the chill creeping past her coat and into her skin. "What now?" Gabriel asked, his voice low. She hesitated, her hand instinctively reaching for the bracelet. The charms felt warmer now, their edges smooth and reassuring. "We need to see what's down there," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Gabriel pulled a length of rope from his bag, tying one end securely around the rod and lowering it into the water. The rope disappeared into the darkness, its descent slow and deliberate. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of their breaths and the faint creak of the ice beneath them. Then, the rope went taut. Gabriel's hands tightened on the rope, his muscles straining as he began to pull. Whatever lay below fought against his efforts, as though the lake itself was unwilling to relinquish its secrets. Amelia moved to help, her hands gripping the rope alongside his. Together, they hauled the weight upward, inch by inch, until something broke the surface with a splash. It was a wooden chest, its edges worn and its surface coated in frost. The metal hinges were rusted, and the wood creaked ominously as Gabriel set it on the ice. Amelia stared at it, her pulse racing. This was it, the truth Theodore had written about, hidden beneath the ice for decades. Gabriel handed her a small crowbar, stepping back to give her space. "It's your family's legacy," he said softly. Amelia nodded, her hands trembling as she pried open the lid. Inside, nestled among layers of faded cloth, was a bundle wrapped in velvet. She unwrapped it carefully, revealing an ornate lantern made of brass and glass. It was exquisitely crafted, its surface etched with intricate patterns of stars and snowflakes. The glass panels shimmered faintly, as though holding a light that wasn't entirely of this world. "A lantern?" Gabriel asked, his brow furrowing. Amelia's fingers traced the patterns, a sense of recognition stirring within her. "It's not just a lantern," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's the light Theodore wrote about." As she spoke, the glass panels began to glow softly, a warm, golden light spreading across the ice. The bracelet on her wrist seemed to hum in response, the charms vibrating gently against her skin. For a moment, the world around them felt different, as though they had stepped into a realm untouched by time. Gabriel's voice broke the silence. "What do we do with it?" Amelia stared into the lantern's light, the answer coming to her as though whispered by an unseen voice. "We share it," she said. "That's what Theodore wanted. The light isn't meant to be hidden. It's meant to bring hope." The glow from the lantern grew brighter, casting long shadows across the frozen lake. Amelia felt a warmth she hadn't known in years, a sense of connection to something greater than herself. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time, she felt certain they were on the right path. As they packed the lantern and began their trek back to town, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it a sense of promise. The ice had given up its secrets, and the echoes of the past were beginning to weave a story of hope and redemption. Chapter 9. A Heart Half Open. Amelia's footsteps were soft on the snow as she wandered down the winding path beside the lake, the cool winter air nipping at her cheeks. The bracelet on her wrist gleamed faintly beneath her coat sleeve, a constant reminder of the magic it held, a magic that had already granted so many wishes, yet still, one wish remained unspoken. It wasn't just any wish, though. This was a wish for herself, the kind of desire that made her feel selfish and uncertain. She didn't know if it was possible for the charm to grant a wish for herself, but the temptation gnawed at her every waking moment. Gabriel's face haunted her thoughts. She couldn't deny the pull between them, the way his sadness mirrored her own and how his quiet strength had slowly unraveled her own insecurities. There was something buried deep within him, something he refused to let go of, and no matter how many wishes she granted to others, it seemed that her heart longed to make a wish for him, to unlock whatever shadowed his heart. But would it be enough? Could the charm help him, or would it turn out to be nothing more than a fleeting fantasy? The town was quieter than usual, the holidays looming on the horizon, but still distant enough to leave a sense of anticipation in the air. The street lamps flickered with a soft glow, their light reflecting off the snow in delicate patterns. The stillness was almost haunting, and for a moment, Amelia felt as though she had slipped into another world, one where time moved differently, where wishes weren't just dreams but tangible possibilities. She arrived at the small bridge near the lake's edge and stopped, her breath fogging in the cold. The water below was frozen, the surface smooth and glassy. She looked at her reflection, noticing the way her own gaze seemed distant, uncertain. In her hand, the charm bracelet rested like a weight she couldn't escape. For weeks, she had carried it with her, granting wishes, helping others, all the while wondering if this was truly her purpose. Gabriel had kept his distance lately. He had been polite, respectful even, but there was a coolness in his demeanor that had not been there before. She had seen the way his eyes would flicker away when she tried to approach him, the way his smile never quite reached his eyes. It had taken everything in her to ignore the sinking feeling in her chest, the feeling that whatever was between them was slowly slipping away. Was he afraid of what might happen if he let himself be close to her? Or was it something deeper, something tied to the secrets he was so unwilling to share? The bracelet seemed to pulse against her wrist, as if urging her to do something, to act before it was too late. The weight of her decision pressed down on her. Should she use her final wish to unlock Gabriel's past, to ease the sorrow that held him captive? Or should she hold back, afraid of what the wish might cost? Was it selfish to want to know more, to wish for his heart to open to her? She glanced at the small house in the distance, the faint light flickering in the windows. It was Gabriel's home, and though she had been here countless times, today it felt different, like the air itself held a secret, one she wasn't sure she was ready to face. With a deep breath, Amelia crossed the bridge and made her way toward the door. Her hand hovered over the doorknob for a moment before she knocked softly, the sound echoing in the silent night. It felt like an eternity before the door creaked open, revealing Gabriel standing on the other side. His face softened when he saw her, but the warmth in his expression was fleeting. "Amelia," he said quietly, his voice thick with something she couldn't quite place. "What brings you here?" I was hoping we could talk," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's something I need to ask you." He stepped back, allowing her to enter, but there was a distance in his eyes that made her heart flutter with uncertainty. as she stepped inside. The familiar scent of wood and cinnamon filled the air, but it wasn't enough to chase away the unease that had settled in her chest. "Of course," he said, leading her into the small sitting room. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting shadows on the walls. Gabriel lowered himself into the armchair by the fire, but he didn't look at her, his gaze fixed on the flickering flames. Amelia stood for a moment, unsure of how to begin. She couldn't shake the feeling that Gabriel was retreating further from her, as though her presence alone reminded him of something he wasn't ready to face. "I don't know how to say this," she began, her voice shaky. "But I think I understand now. The wishes, the bracelet, the way it's changed everything. But there's something I'm not sure of. Something that's been eating at me." Gabriel turned his eyes to her, his brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean?" "The final wish," she said, holding her wrist up, the charm glinting in the firelight. "I don't know if I'm supposed to use it for myself. I've granted wishes for others, but there's still one left. And I'm not sure what it means to make a wish for myself. Maybe it's selfish, but I want to know if there's something I can do for you. Something that will make everything easier for you." Gabriel's eyes darkened, his face hardening as he looked away. "Amelia, you don't have to do that. I've told you before. There's nothing that can change what's happened. But what if there is?" she pressed, stepping closer. "What if this is the way to break free from the past? What if the wish could be the key to unlocking what you've kept hidden?" For the first time in what felt like days, Gabriel met her gaze, his eyes filled with a mix of sorrow and resignation. "Some things can't be wished away," he murmured. Amelia swallowed hard, her fingers curling around the bracelet. The words seemed to hang in the air, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. She had wanted to help him, but now she wasn't sure how to proceed. Was this the moment to make the final wish, the one that would change everything? Her heart thudded in her chest as she made her decision. She would grant her final wish, not for herself, but for Gabriel, for whatever his heart had been hiding all these years. And as the fire flickered behind them, the quiet promise of her wish hung in the air, a shadow that neither of them could escape. Chapter 10. The Storm's Gift. The days that followed were marked by an unspoken tension that neither Amelia nor Gabriel could escape. The snow continued to fall, blanketing the town in a serene, almost otherworldly silence. Each flake that landed felt like a moment passing, delicate and fleeting, much like the uncertainty that now hung between them. Amelia's heart was heavy with the weight of her decision. She had granted her final wish. It was done, and yet it didn't feel like enough. She found herself walking the same path by the lake again, the crunch of her boots on the snow the only sound in the stillness. The bracelet on her wrist, warm against her skin, had yet to reveal the consequences of the wish. The magic was supposed to be immediate, wasn't it? But nothing had changed. Gabriel still remained distant, the sorrow still clinging to him like a shadow that refused to lift. The memory of their conversation echoed in her mind, the words he had spoken haunting her. Some things can't be wished away. How could he believe that? Was it truly possible for the past to be so unforgiving? And what about her? What about the wish she had granted? Had she done the right thing? With a sigh, Amelia stopped at the edge of the lake, staring at the frozen surface. The stillness of the water mirrored the stillness inside her. She had given him the wish he never asked for, hoping that it would release the grip of his pain. But now, in the quiet aftermath, she wasn't sure what to expect. Suddenly, she heard footsteps crunching behind her, slow and deliberate. She turned to see Gabriel standing at a distance, his hands shoved deep into his coat pockets. His presence was familiar yet foreign, like a memory she couldn't quite place. The soft glow of the street lamps reflected off the snow, casting an almost ethereal light over him, making him appear as though he were part of the landscape, timeless, quiet, and far away. "Amelia," he said, his voice low, almost hesitant. "I've been meaning to speak with you." She swallowed, her heart racing despite the cold. "What about?" Gabriel took a step forward, his gaze fixed on her with an intensity that made her feel both vulnerable and seen. "About the wish." The word hung in the air between them, and Amelia's breath caught in her throat. She had feared this moment, the moment when her decision would come to fruition, when Gabriel would finally confront her about what she had done. "I don't know if I should have done it," she admitted quietly, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I thought it might help, but now I'm not so sure. I only wanted to. I thought maybe, just maybe, it would bring you peace." Gabriel's eyes softened, though the sadness still lingered there. "You didn't have to do that. I never asked for anything." "I know," she replied, her fingers tightening around the charm bracelet. "But it felt like the right thing to do. I thought if I could give you what you needed, you might finally let go of whatever is holding you back." He was silent for a moment, as if weighing her words, before he spoke again. "I didn't want you to carry that burden for me. I never wanted you to feel responsible for fixing me." Amelia felt a pang in her chest. "I didn't do it because I thought I could fix you," she said, her voice shaking. "I did it because I care about you, Gabriel. I thought if I could help in some way, maybe it would make everything easier for you. I didn't want you to feel like you were alone." For the first time in days, Gabriel's expression shifted. The walls he had built around himself seemed to falter, if only for a moment. "I didn't realize you cared so much," he said, his voice almost unreadable. She took a tentative step closer, the cold air brushing against her face as the night seemed to close in around them. "I've cared for a long time," she said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "But you've been so closed off, so distant, that I didn't know how to reach you." "I still don't." Gabriel's gaze flickered away, the vulnerability in his eyes quickly masked by his usual guarded demeanor. He turned his face to the side, as if trying to gather his thoughts. "I've spent years hiding from the past," he murmured, almost to himself. "I thought if I could just bury it, it would stop hurting. But it never did." Amelia stepped closer still, her heart pounding in her chest. "What happened, Gabriel? What are you hiding from?" Gabriel's eyes darkened, and for a moment, he looked like a man trapped by something far beyond his control. He shook his head slightly, as though struggling to find the words. "There are things I've done, things I can't undo. And the longer I keep them locked away, the more it feels like they'll consume me." Her breath caught in her throat. The weight of his words pressed on her chest, a heaviness that she wasn't sure how to bear. But even as he spoke, she could sense the flicker of hope beneath his words, a desire to let go, to finally share whatever burden he had carried in silence for so long. "Gabriel," she said softly, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "Whatever it is, you don't have to carry it alone. I'm here. You don't have to hide from me." Gabriel looked at her then, really looked at her, as though seeing her for the first time in a long while. The sadness in his eyes was still there, but now there was something else, something softer, more open. "I don't know if I can let go of it," he said, his voice strained. "I don't know if I deserve to." "You do," Amelia whispered, her heart aching. "You deserve peace, Gabriel, and I'll be here, whatever it takes. But you have to let me in." For a long moment, neither of them moved. The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken words and fragile hopes. Finally, Gabriel let out a long, slow breath and took a step closer to her, his hand reaching for the charm bracelet that had been a part of her journey all along. He brushed his fingers over it gently, as though testing its magic, its power. "I don't know if your wish will change anything," he said quietly, his voice raw, "but maybe, just maybe, it's time I let go." Amelia's heart skipped a beat. Had the wish already started its work? Or was it the simple act of standing together, facing their fears, that had made the difference? Either way, the shadow of his past seemed to lift, if only for a moment, as they stood side by side. The promise of something new hanging in the still winter air. Chapter 11. Whispers turned to cries. The following days moved with an unexpected ease, like the quiet after a storm, when the wind settles and the world seems to breathe again. Amelia found herself waking each morning with a sense of cautious hope, a feeling she hadn't allowed herself in years. The change between her and Gabriel was subtle, but it was there, hovering just beneath the surface, like the promise of spring beneath the weight of winter. The magic of the bracelet had begun to feel like an old friend, its power woven so tightly into her life that she could no longer imagine a world without it. Yet, there was something different now. She no longer relied on it for answers. It had granted her final wish, but it was clear that the most important changes would not come from any charm. It was Gabriel, his willingness to let go of his pain, that would shape the future. Amelia spent her days helping the townspeople prepare for the holiday festival, feeling the rhythm of their community settle into a familiar, comforting beat. There was a quiet joy in watching the town come to life. Lights twinkling in every window, the smell of pine and cinnamon filling the air, and the soft murmur of families gathering. It was in the small things, the everyday miracles, that she found her heart slowly healing. But no matter how full the days seemed, Amelia's thoughts always returned to Gabriel. She knew he was still fighting battles within himself, still pushing against the walls he had built so high. But there was also a softness in him now, something she had caught glimpses of in the quiet moments when their gazes met, when his touch lingered just a little longer than necessary. One evening, as the town was bathed in the glow of Christmas lights, Amelia found herself standing near the edge of the lake again. The sky had darkened to a deep indigo, the stars scattered like diamonds above her. The lake stretched out before her, its surface smooth as glass, reflecting the night in perfect stillness. She could feel the weight of her decision, of granting the wish for Gabriel, still resting on her heart. It had been a gamble, one that had required more faith than she had ever known she had. Amelia? She turned to see Gabriel walking toward her, his figure silhouetted against the backdrop of the shimmering lake. The sight of him, so familiar yet so distant, stirred something deep within her chest. For a moment, they just stood there, the space between them filled with a quiet tension that had become both comfortable and uncertain. "Hi," she said, her voice soft but warm. She could hear the rustle of his coat as he stepped closer, the crunch of snow beneath his boots. "Can we talk?" His voice was low, almost hesitant, as though he were unsure of how to begin. Amelia nodded, her heart beating a little faster as she stepped aside, making room for him beside her. They stood together, side by side, watching the lake's surface shimmer under the pale light. The world around them seemed so still, as though everything were holding its breath. "I've been thinking," Gabriel began, his words careful, measured, "about the wish you made, and about everything you've done for me." Amelia's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected him to bring it up again so soon. The weight of his words settled on her, the quiet intensity of the moment pressing against her chest. "Gabriel, you don't have to thank me for anything," she said softly. "I did what I thought was right." He turned toward her then, his eyes searching hers, trying to find something she wasn't sure she could give. "You've done more than what's right. You've given me something I never thought I'd have again. Hope. And I think I've been afraid of it." Amelia felt a rush of warmth flood her chest. There it was, the thing she had been waiting for. His acknowledgement, his willingness to face the past, to move towards something better. She could feel the shift in him, in his words, in his actions. It was a beginning, a small but significant step forward. Hope can be terrifying, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But it's also the only thing that keeps us going, isn't it? Gabriel nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. I've spent so long locked inside myself, Amelia. I've kept everything buried because I thought it would protect me, but I was wrong. I was wrong about so many things. The quiet confession hung in the air between them, and for a moment, Amelia felt as though the world had paused, as though time itself had given them this space to breathe, to heal. The magic of the bracelet, the wishes granted, the decisions made. They had all led to this moment. But it was Gabriel's willingness to face his fears, to take a chance on something he had been avoiding for so long, that made everything feel possible. I don't know what the future holds, Gabriel continued, his voice steady but filled with an emotion Amelia couldn't quite place. But I know that I don't want to keep running from it anymore. I don't want to keep running from you. Amelia's heart swelled with something she couldn't put into words. There was no grand gesture, no dramatic confession, but the quiet sincerity in his eyes spoke volumes. In that moment, she knew, truly knew, that the past could be forgiven, that the future was still open to them, that all of the unspoken promises they had kept buried for so long could now be brought into the light. You don't have to run anymore, Amelia said, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. I'm here, Gabriel, and I always will be. He reached out then, his hand brushing against hers in a gentle, tentative gesture. The touch was enough to send a shiver down her spine. The warmth of his fingers against hers a quiet affirmation of everything that was beginning to unfold. No more walls, no more barriers. Just two people standing together, uncertain but willing to take the next step. The world seemed to hold its breath around them as the first snowflakes of the evening began to fall, drifting softly from the sky. The quiet sound of the snow hitting the ground was the only thing that broke the silence, as if nature itself were giving them its blessing. Gabriel turned toward her fully now, his hand still lingering near hers. I've never been good at making promises, he said, his voice low. But I can promise you this. I'll try. I'll try to be the man you deserve. I'll try to be someone who doesn't hide anymore. Amelia smiled softly, the weight in her chest finally lifting. That's all I can ask for, she said, her voice steady. I'm not asking for perfection. I just want you to be here, with me, for whatever comes next. And in that moment, everything shifted. The wishes, the magic, the past. It all seemed to fade into the background, leaving only the two of them standing in the snow, uncertain but hopeful, ready to take on whatever the future might hold. As the snow continued to fall around them, the world felt smaller, gentler, as if everything had been leading to this single moment, this chance to begin again, to rewrite the story they would share together. Chapter 12. The Keeper of Truth. The weeks leading up to Christmas passed in a quiet flurry of activity, with the town immersed in the warmth of the holiday season. Amelia had long ago lost track of the days, caught in the rhythm of life that seemed to expand and contract with the arrival of each snowstorm. It was as though the world had slowed down to match the tempo of her heart, patient, deliberate, yet uncertain. The magic of the bracelet and the wish she had granted still lingered in the air like the scent of pine, but it was no longer at the forefront of her thoughts. Gabriel was. Though their conversations had grown more frequent and his presence had become a source of comfort, Amelia still sensed a certain tension between them. A thread pulled tight, a promise made but not yet fulfilled. There were moments, like fleeting whispers, when Gabriel would pull away, lost in thoughts that remained unspoken. His guardedness hadn't vanished entirely, but there was something else, something new, beneath the surface. His smiles were more genuine now, and the way he looked at her, soft and uncertain, yet hopeful, spoke volumes. Amelia, too, found herself changing. The weight of her own uncertainty seemed lighter, the quiet ache in her chest from years of holding back easing bit by bit. She had opened herself up to him in ways she hadn't thought possible, and though the future still seemed unclear, it felt like she was walking beside him towards something new. The past, with all its scars, no longer held the same power over her. One afternoon, when the sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the snow-dusted streets, Amelia found herself back at the old house where it all began. The place where she had first found the charm bracelet, where her life had taken a turn she could never have predicted. The house stood silent and still, its windows glowing faintly with the warmth of the hearth inside. But the air around it felt different now. It no longer held the same eerie presence. Instead, it felt like a place of quiet contemplation, a bridge between what had been and what could be. She stood at the front door for a long moment, her hand resting on the cold brass handle before she stepped inside. The house creaked in familiar ways as she moved through the dimly lit hallway, the scent of old wood and lingering memories filling the air. It was here, in this place, that her journey with the bracelet had begun. But it was also here, in the quiet corners of the house, that Gabriel had first begun to open up to her. It had been the space where their fates had intertwined, where wishes had been made and broken. Amelia's footsteps echoed softly in the hallway as she made her way toward the small parlor where she had first sat, the bracelet resting in her hand. The room looked unchanged, the old furniture still covered in dust cloths, the fireplace silent and cold. It was as if time had frozen here, locked in place by the memories that clung to the walls like the faded tapestries hanging in the corners. Her fingers grazed the edge of the mantelpiece, and for a moment, the weight of everything she had uncovered in this house, the history, the secrets, the wishes, pressed against her chest. She had granted her final wish for Gabriel. The bracelet had fulfilled its purpose, or so she thought. Yet, as the days passed, she couldn't help but wonder if there was more to the story, if the bracelet's magic hadn't quite finished its work. The thought lingered like a shadow as she moved to the small table near the window, where she had first discovered the letters and the bracelet's origins. She had never truly understood why the charm had been passed to her, or why it had appeared when it did. But in the months since that first discovery, she had come to realize that it was never just about the wishes. It was about learning to believe in something bigger than herself. The bracelet had been a catalyst, yes, but it was the choices they made, the path they walked together, that had led her to this moment. Amelia sat down at the table, the stillness of the room wrapping around her like a familiar blanket. As her eyes roamed over the letters once more, she noticed something she hadn't before. Something hidden among the delicate, yellowed pages. A single phrase, written in the margin of one of the letters, caught her eye. The last wish has yet to be granted. Her breath caught in her throat as she traced the words with trembling fingers. She had thought the bracelet's magic had worked itself out, that the final wish had been made. But here it was, this cryptic message, suggesting that there was something more. A final wish still waiting to be granted. Confusion washed over her as she stood up, pacing the small room. Had she misunderstood the magic? Or had there been something else all along, something she hadn't seen? The bracelet, which had once felt like an answer to everything, now seemed like a riddle she couldn't solve. As she stood by the window, looking out over the snow-covered landscape, a soft knock echoed through the room, pulling her from her thoughts. She turned to find Gabriel standing in the doorway, his silhouette framed by the dim light of the hallway. His presence, though still slightly uncertain, was a comfort. "Amelia," he said, his voice steady but filled with an unspoken question. "I've been looking for you." She blinked, surprised by the emotion in his tone. "I didn't mean to worry you," she said, her voice soft. "I just needed some time to think." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "I understand, but I think we need to talk. About everything. About us." Amelia's heart beat faster at the sound of those words. There was no more avoiding it, no more running from the things they had left unsaid. The space between them, once filled with uncertainty and fear, now seemed to pulse with something different, a quiet understanding that had only grown stronger over time. "Gabriel," she began, turning to face him, "I found something today. A message in one of the letters." She held out the letter, the fragile paper creasing under her fingers. "It says the last wish has yet to be granted." His eyes scanned the letter quickly before meeting her gaze. "What does that mean?" "I don't know," she admitted, her voice faltering. "I thought the wish I made for you was the last one, but maybe there's something more. Something I haven't seen yet." Gabriel stood in silence for a moment, the weight of her words settling between them. Then, slowly, as if making a decision, he reached out and took her hand in his. "Maybe it's not just about the wishes anymore, Amelia. Maybe it's about us. What we want from this, from each other." Her heart skipped a beat. The uncertainty that had once held her captive began to loosen its grip. They had been brought together by something magical, something beyond their understanding. But it was the choices they made now, in the present, that would shape their future. "I think you're right," she whispered. "Maybe it's time to make our own wishes now." Chapter 13. The Final Wish. The days between Christmas and New Year's in the small lakeside town were always a blur of lights and laughter, the weight of the season pressing softly on everyone's shoulders as they drifted toward the end of the year. Amelia had never quite understood how people could feel both the joy and the melancholy of the holidays in such a delicate balance. But this year, it made sense. The magic that had unfolded over the past weeks, the wishes granted, the choices made, and the quiet understanding that had begun to blossom between her and Gabriel had created something both beautiful and bittersweet. The message in the letter had stayed with her, lingering in her thoughts like a whispered secret. The last wish had yet to be granted. She had no idea what it meant, no clear answer in sight, but something deep inside her told her that the final wish was not meant to be for herself. It wasn't about more magic or more wishes. It was about the people they had become and the people they would choose to be. Amelia had spent much of her days reflecting on everything: the bracelet, Gabriel, and the strange pull of fate that had led her here. The wish she had made for Gabriel, to open his heart and free him from the past, had already begun to shift things. She could see the change in him each day, subtle but significant. He was no longer the man he had been when they first met. There was a lightness in him now, a willingness to face his fears, and most importantly, a tenderness he hadn't allowed himself to show before. But there were still moments when the shadows of his past crept into the quiet spaces between them. She could feel them, the unspoken fears and regrets that seemed to hover just out of reach, like distant thunder before a storm. But she also knew, deep down, that the magic wasn't something they needed to force. The magic was in their willingness to take a chance on each other, to make the decision every day to face the unknown together. Amelia walked through the town one late afternoon, the sky above her darkening into a blanket of deep indigo, stars beginning to peek through the veil. The streets were empty except for a few last-minute shoppers, and the snow crunched underfoot as she made her way toward Gabriel's workshop. The scent of wood and pine reached her before she even stepped inside, a comforting reminder of the place where everything had started. The workshop, though small, was alive with the soft hum of activity. Gabriel had always been quiet in the way he worked, his movements fluid and purposeful as he carved, shaped, and built. It was his space, a place where the outside world faded away and only the art of creation remained. But recently, it had become more than just a place for his craft. It had become a place where he allowed himself to be seen, to be vulnerable in ways he hadn't been before. As she pushed open the door, the warmth of the fire inside greeted her, along with the soft light that flickered from the oil lamps on the workbenches. Gabriel was hunched over a piece of wood, a carving tool in his hand, the steady rhythm of his work filling the room with a sense of peace. He didn't look up when she entered, but there was something in the way the corner of his mouth quirked up that told her he knew she was there. "You're early," he said, his voice low and warm. Amelia smiled and leaned against the doorway. "I thought I'd surprise you." He glanced up then, his gaze meeting hers for a moment before he set down the carving tool and wiped his hands on a cloth. "Mission accomplished," he said, his voice soft with a hint of humor. "What's on your mind?" She stepped further into the room, the air thick with the scent of fresh wood shavings and something deeper, something that felt like home. She hadn't been sure what she was looking for when she came here, but now, standing in front of him, she felt like she had found a piece of herself she hadn't even realized was missing. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice hesitant but steady, "about the wish I made for you, the one that the bracelet granted. I've been wondering, what if that wasn't the last wish?" Gabriel's brows furrowed slightly as he straightened, his expression turning thoughtful. "What do you mean?" Amelia took a breath, her heart beating a little faster as she gathered her thoughts. "I think the bracelet has done its part, but there's still something left unsaid. Something we haven't figured out yet." She paused, glancing out the window toward the snowflakes that were beginning to fall again, their delicate patterns dancing in the soft glow of the streetlights outside. "I don't think it's about what the bracelet can give us. I think it's about what we're willing to give each other." Gabriel was silent for a long moment, his eyes watching her closely, as though he were trying to read between the lines of her words. Finally, he took a step toward her, his presence grounding and steady. "I think you're right," he said quietly, his voice soft with understanding. "The magic wasn't in the bracelet. It was in the choice we made. To let go of the past. To move forward, together." Amelia nodded, her heart swelling with a mixture of relief and hope. "And maybe the last wish is something we haven't even realized yet. Something we need to choose, every day. To make this work. To choose each other." Gabriel reached out then, his hand brushing against hers, his touch warm and steady. She could feel the shift in the air around them, the space between them no longer filled with uncertainty, but with something deeper, something more permanent. "What if we don't need the magic anymore?" he asked softly. "What if we already have everything we need?" Amelia smiled, a soft laugh escaping her lips. "I think we do." They stood there for a long moment, simply allowing themselves to exist in the quiet of the room, the soft sound of the snow falling outside the only noise breaking the silence. Everything felt like it was finally falling into place, as though the last pieces of a puzzle had clicked together. Later that evening, after they had shared a quiet meal and spent the evening wrapped in conversation, Gabriel took her hand as they stood in front of the fire, the soft glow casting their shadows on the walls. "I think I've figured out what the last wish is," he said quietly, his voice filled with a certainty that made Amelia's heart leap. "What is it?" she asked, her eyes searching his. He smiled, a gentle, tender smile that reached all the way to his eyes. "It's the wish to never stop choosing each other. Every day. No magic needed. Just us." Amelia's breath caught in her throat, the weight of his words settling in her chest like a warm embrace. There was no grand gesture, no sweeping moment of revelation. Just the quiet, powerful decision to build a future together, day by day. And in that moment, as the fire flickered and the world outside faded into the night, Amelia knew. She didn't need the bracelet. She didn't need anything more than this. The promise of tomorrow, wrapped in the simple act of choosing love, was the most powerful wish she could have ever made. And it was enough. Chapter 14. unraveling Gabriel. The days between Christmas and the arrival of the new year passed like a dream. Slow, peaceful, and filled with a kind of quiet happiness Amelia had never truly known. The snow continued to fall in delicate, shimmering layers, blanketing the town in its soft, wintry embrace. It felt as though the world had taken a pause, giving everyone the time to reflect, to heal, and to begin again. And for Amelia, this period of stillness was exactly what she needed. The wish that had haunted her thoughts, the last wish, the one written in the letter, now felt less like a mystery and more like a confirmation. It wasn't magic that was left to be granted, she realized, but rather a simple, unwavering choice. A choice to build a life, to let go of past regrets, and to move forward, with no need for external forces or enchantments. There was no grand gesture that would fix everything, no miraculous transformation. It was simply about love, trust, and the quiet promises they had made to each other every day. The bracelet, which had once been the center of her world, now felt like a distant memory, still precious, still important, but no longer the focal point of her journey. It had served its purpose, and now it was time for her to take control of the life she was building, one step at a time. Gabriel had been by her side every moment, his presence a constant comfort. In the days that followed their quiet conversation about choosing each other, they had become a team in every sense. Gabriel had been working on a new project, an intricate wooden toy he was crafting for the upcoming New Year's festival, and he invited her to join him in the workshop, watching him carve, shape, and perfect his creation. She marveled at the ease with which he worked, the care he poured into each detail, and the way his focus seemed to transcend everything else. There was something about being in his space, watching him create, that felt intimate in a way she hadn't expected. It wasn't just the art. It was the act of sharing a moment together, side by side, without words. The simple act of being in each other's company, without the weight of expectations or past wounds, had become enough. It wasn't about rushing into a future or fixing what had been broken. It was about understanding the quiet beauty of the present, of being in this space, at this time, with this person. On one particularly cold evening, when the snow had piled high outside and the wind howled against the windows, Gabriel invited Amelia to join him for a walk through the woods that bordered the town. He had always loved the quiet of the forest in the winter, the way the snow clung to the trees and softened the world into something magical. It had been a long time since he had ventured into the woods, and Amelia was eager to see it through his eyes. As they walked side by side, the crisp air biting at their cheeks, Gabriel spoke about the past. The days when he had lived in the town as a child, before everything had changed. His words were few, but there was a quiet honesty to them that made Amelia want to listen more closely. She could hear the echoes of his childhood in the way he described the woods, the fields, and the lake, as if those places had once been his refuge, his sanctuary. They were the places that had shaped him, that had shaped his view of the world. And now, as they walked through them together, it felt like he was letting her in on a secret he had kept hidden for so long. "Do you ever wonder," Gabriel said as they reached the edge of the lake, his voice soft and contemplative, "if we're ever meant to truly escape our past? Or if we're supposed to carry it with us?" Amelia stopped walking, her boots crunching softly in the snow. She turned to face him, the glow from the distant lights of the town casting a soft halo around his face. She had never quite heard him speak so openly about his past, and it left her feeling vulnerable in a way she hadn't expected. "I don't know," she said, her voice quiet as she considered his words. "I think we carry our past with us, but I don't think it has to define us. Maybe it's about how we choose to carry it, and whether we let it control us." Gabriel nodded, the weight of her words settling between them. He reached out, his hand brushing against hers, and for a moment they stood in silence, the wind swirling around them like an unspoken promise. The snowflakes drifted down in slow motion, coating the world in a soft, white blanket. "I used to think that my past would always hold me back," Gabriel said, his voice barely a whisper. "That the things I had done, the choices I had made, would always be a part of me, that I could never move beyond them." He paused, taking a deep breath as though gathering his thoughts. "But now, with you, I think maybe I can let go of that. Maybe I can choose to be more than just the sum of my mistakes." Amelia's heart swelled with emotion as she looked at him, her hand finding his once again. It was in this moment, in the quiet stillness of the snow-covered world, that she realized how far they had come, how far he had come, and how far they could still go, together. "You already are more than that," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "You've always been more than that." Gabriel smiled, the tension in his shoulders easing as he looked at her. "And you, Amelia? What about you? Have you figured out what you want yet?" She didn't hesitate. "I think I have," she said, her voice steady but filled with conviction. "I want to keep choosing this, choosing us, every day. That's all I need. Everything else will fall into place." Gabriel's smile deepened, and for the first time, Amelia saw a glimpse of something she hadn't seen before. Peace. A quiet, hard-won peace that came from accepting who they were and what they had been through. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't always easy, but it was theirs. As they continued their walk, the light from the town reflecting off the snow like 1,000 tiny stars, Amelia felt the weight of the world lighten just a little more. They walked side by side, their footprints leaving a trail in the snow, a mark of the journey they had taken together. They didn't need to speak anymore. The words had already been said. The last wish, it seemed, had been granted without them even realizing it. It was the simple promise of tomorrow, a promise to keep choosing each other, a promise to embrace the love that had already begun to take root between them. And as the world around them continued to sleep beneath its blanket of snow, Amelia knew no magic was required. She had everything she needed right here, in the warmth of Gabriel's hand and the quiet certainty of their love. Chapter 15, A Christmas Forever. The first few days of the new year arrived with a gentle hush, as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for something momentous to happen. The chill in the air had not yet softened, but there was a shift, a subtle change that seemed to mark the end of one chapter and the quiet promise of another. The town, though small and often quiet, was bustling in its own way, preparing for the New Year's festival that would bring together the community in a celebration of hope, renewal, and the promise of new beginnings. Amelia had spent the past week helping Gabriel with his work in the shop, marveling at the intricacies of the wooden toys he crafted, each one more detailed than the last. The process of creation had become a shared experience between them, something simple yet profound. It wasn't about grand gestures or lavish displays. It was about the quiet joy of building something with your own hands, something that would bring happiness to others. As they worked side by side, there was a comfort in their silence, a knowing that hung in the air between them. Gabriel no longer carried the weight of his past as he once had, and Amelia had found peace in the way their lives had intertwined. There was no need for magic now, no need for anything more than their willingness to face the future together. The last wish, the one they had both made in their hearts, had already been fulfilled in ways they had never expected. It was one evening, just before the festival, when Gabriel asked her to come with him to the lake, the same place where they had walked a few weeks before. The snow had begun to melt in patches, but there was still enough to cover the ground, and the air was crisp and cold, the sky above a deep, cloudless blue. "I've been thinking," Gabriel said, his voice soft as they walked along the frozen shoreline, "about everything, about us." Amelia smiled up at him, her heart lighter than it had been in a long time. What about us? He stopped walking, turning to face her with a look of quiet intensity in his eyes. About how we've changed, he said. About how we've both found a way to move beyond the things that used to hold us back. I'm not the same man I was when we first met, and I don't think you are either. Amelia felt her breath catch in her throat. There had been so much uncertainty in the beginning. The bracelet, the wishes, the fear of what might lie ahead. But now, standing here with Gabriel, she understood what he meant. They had both been through a transformation, and it was in those changes that they had found each other in a way that was deeper, more real than anything they could have anticipated. I know, she said, her voice barely a whisper. We've both learned so much. Gabriel reached for her hand, his touch warm despite the cold of the evening. I don't want to go another day without making sure you know how much I mean it. I don't want to keep looking back. I want to move forward with you. Amelia's heart swelled at his words. There was no hesitation, no lingering doubts, just a clear, undeniable certainty in the way he looked at her. I want that too, she replied softly. I want to move forward, together. Gabriel smiled, a tender expression that spoke volumes. Then let's make that our promise. Not just for today, or for tomorrow, but for the rest of our lives. The air between them seemed to shift, charged with an energy that neither of them had expected, but both of them knew to be true. They didn't need anything more than this moment, this shared understanding, and the quiet commitment to building a future side by side. The magic of the bracelet had faded, but the magic of their love, the kind of love that was real, grounded, and full of hope, was something they both had come to cherish. Later that evening, as the town gathered for the New Year's festival, the atmosphere was alive with excitement. The streets were lined with lights, and the scent of pine and cinnamon filled the air. There was laughter, music, and the warmth of community, but it was the presence of Gabriel's hand in hers that made Amelia feel truly alive. The festival was a celebration of the year gone by and the possibilities of the year ahead. It was a time for families and friends to come together, to honor the bonds that had been forged and the new ones that were waiting to be made. Gabriel had invited her to join him in the square, where he was displaying some of his latest creations. The intricate wooden toys, each one a work of art, were set up on display tables, their smooth surfaces glistening under the festival lights. Amelia couldn't help but smile as she looked at the toys. Each one held a little piece of Gabriel's heart, a reflection of his passion for his craft. But it was the toy in the very center of the display that caught her attention. A small wooden box, intricately carved, with a latch that seemed to shimmer in the light. It was a simple thing, but it felt significant, as though it held something deeper within. "What's this?" she asked, stepping closer to the table. Gabriel smiled as he joined her, his hand brushing against hers once again. "It's for you," he said softly. "A gift. A promise." Amelia's breath caught in her throat as she took the small box in her hands. The weight of it felt familiar, comforting even, as though it had always belonged to her. Slowly, she opened the latch, and inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was the charm bracelet, the same one that had brought them together, the one that had guided them through the journey of wishes and magic. But now, it was no longer a symbol of uncertainty or need. It was a symbol of the love they had found, of the journey they had taken, and of the future they were about to build together. She looked up at Gabriel, her eyes filled with emotion. I thought the magic was gone," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "It's not gone," Gabriel replied, his voice steady and sure. "It's just changed. The magic wasn't in the bracelet. It was in the way we chose to live our lives, in the way we chose each other. That's the real magic." Amelia smiled, her heart swelling with love and gratitude. "And I choose you, Gabriel, every day." Gabriel kissed her then, softly, gently, as the lights of the festival flickered around them. The world seemed to fade away, leaving just the two of them, bound together by love, by promise, and by the certainty that no matter what the future held, they would face it together.